The train was tearing through the dense spring forest, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a steady hum beneath my feet. I had done this route 100 times before. Same trees, same empty stations, same nothing ever happens routine. I leaned back, stretching my arms, already thinking about the coffee waiting for me at the next stop. And then a flicker ahead on the tracks. At first, I thought it was just another deer, maybe a stray dog. But no, the shapes were too big, too still. My hands shot to the brake lever before my brain could catch up. Screeching metal filled the air as the train fought against momentum. Sparks flew. My heart pounded like a war drum. Outside the windshield, I saw them clearly now. A pack of wolves standing motionless on the tracks. The train groaned, struggling to stop. The lead wolf, a massive gray beast with piercing yellow eyes, didn't move an inch. It just stared. The train shuddered to a full stop just feet away from them. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed frozen in my seat, gripping the controls so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind screamed at me to do something. But what? Honk? Try to scare them off? Wait until they just left? And then, out of nowhere, the lead wolf threw its head back and let out a long, desperate howl. The sound sent chills down my spine. The others followed, their voices weaving into the night like an eerie, sorrowful chorus. My instincts told me to stay inside, but something about that howl, it wasn't aggression. It wasn't a warning. It was something else. A plea. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cabin, my boots crunching against the gravel. The wolves didn't run. They didn't charge. They just watched. One of them, a younger-looking one with a reddish coat, whined and took a step forward. Its ears were pinned back, eyes darting between me and something behind the pack. I swallowed hard. What the hell was going on? Then I saw it. Behind them, just barely visible in the dim light, a body. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body on high alert. The lead wolf let out a low, warning growl, but didn't attack. It was guarding something. No, not something, someone. A shape lay sprawled on the side of the tracks, barely moving. I moved my flashlight, my breath catching in my throat. Blood, a lot of it. And then a face. A woman. I froze. My breath came in short, uneven bursts as I took in the scene. The woman was lying on her side, half covered in dirt and dried leaves. Blood smeared across her pale skin. But she was breathing. Barely. The wolves didn't move as I took a cautious step closer, my flashlight beam flickering over her body. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, dark hair matted with blood. Her clothes were torn, but not from an animal attack. No, this was something else. Something worse. I took another step, and that's when the lead wolf bared its teeth, letting out a deep, guttural growl. The others followed, their eyes locked onto me, muscles tense. They weren't just standing there. They were guarding her. What the hell was going on? I raised my hands slowly, trying to show I wasn't a threat. Easy. I just want to help. I muttered, not sure if I was talking to them or myself. The younger wolf, the one with the reddish coat, whimpered and glanced between me and the woman. There was something desperate in its eyes, something almost human. Then I saw movement behind them. At first, I thought it was another person, but the shape was wrong. Too low to the ground. The flashlight revealed a mass of fur, dark and tangled, heaving with slow, labored breaths. Another wolf, a large one, but something was wrong. It wasn't moving right. I took another step and realized why. It was a pregnant female, and she was hurt. The blood wasn't just from the woman. It was pooling beneath the wolf. I felt the cold grip of realization tighten in my chest. The pack wasn't just protecting the woman. They were protecting her and the wounded wolf. But from what? The lead wolf let out another growl. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. Its ears twitched, head snapping toward the darkness beyond the trees. Something else was out there. The air shifted. The other wolves stiffened, their bodies lowering toward the ground. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I turned my flashlight toward the tree line, scanning the shadows. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't know what I was expecting to see. Another animal? Person? Something worse? A branch snapped in the distance. The pack bristled. The lead wolf let out a low, warning growl, stepping closer to the woman and the injured female. Whatever had done this to them, it was still nearby. And now it knew I was here too. My fingers hovered over my radio as I debated what the hell to do next. The woman was barely breathing, the pregnant wolf even worse off, and the rest of the pack was on edge, ears flicking toward the darkness beyond the tracks. I needed help. But what kind of help? I pressed the button on my radio, my voice tight. "This is Train 4072. I need assistance." The static cracked before a voice answered. "What's the problem, Stevens?" I took a breath. "There's an issue on the tracks. A woman, she's hurt, and a wolf pregnant. The pack's here too. I don't know what happened, but they're not attacking. They're protecting." Silence. Then a chuckle. "You're calling me about some damn wolves? Stevens, you're holding up freight for this." My jaw clenched. "She's gonna die if I leave her here." More static. A sigh. "Look, I don't know what you expect me to do. That's not our problem. Call the cops if you want, but you need to clear the tracks." He was telling me to leave. Just keep going. Pretend none of this was happening. The woman groaned softly. Barely a sound, but enough. I wasn't leaving. I killed the radio and shoved it back onto my belt. The wolves were still watching me, waiting. Slowly, I raised my hands again and stepped forward. The lead wolf didn't move, but his eyes tracked my every step. His muscles were coiled, ready to lunge if I made the wrong move. "I don't want to hurt her," I murmured. "Or you." I wasn't sure why I was talking to them like they could understand me. Maybe they could. Maybe they just needed to see I wasn't the threat here. The reddish wolf whined again, looking between me and the pregnant female. She was struggling now, her breaths too shallow. Time was running out. I had to act. Bracing myself, I took another step. The lead wolf let out a low, warning growl but didn't attack. Then I moved closer again. Nothing. I was in. Kneeling beside the woman, I checked her pulse. Weak but still there. Her face was pale, lips cracked. Dried blood streaked down the side of her head. She needed a hospital. Fast. Then I looked at the wolf. Her belly was swollen. Her breathing labored. She was in labor. Shit. I had a choice to make. Take the woman and get her help? Stay and try to help the wolf? The pack was watching me, trusting me. I exhaled sharply. No turning back now. I was saving them both. I crouched next to the pregnant wolf, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her breaths were uneven, each one a struggle. Blood stained her thick fur, pooling beneath her. If I hesitated any longer, she wouldn't make it. The lead wolf stood inches away, his yellow eyes locked onto mine. He knew what I was about to do. The rest of the pack tensed, muscles coiled, ready to spring if I made a wrong move. I swallowed hard. "I have to move her," I whispered, as if they could understand. Maybe they did. The reddish wolf whined and took a hesitant step toward me, ears pinned back. He was younger, not as hardened as the others. He wasn't sure what to do. Slowly, carefully, I slid my arms under the wounded female. She barely reacted, too weak to fight, too exhausted to care. As I lifted her, she let out a small, pained yelp. Instantly, the pack erupted. A chorus of growls filled the air. The lead wolf bared his teeth, but he didn't lunge. The others circled, tails stiff, bodies low. I didn't stop moving. If I hesitated now, they'd think I was a threat. "Easy," I muttered, my voice as steady as I could manage. Step by step, I backed away from the pack, cradling the massive wolf in my arms. Her body was heavier than I expected, her warmth seeping into me. She was still alive, but barely. The lead wolf followed. Not close enough to attack, but close enough to make sure I didn't try anything stupid. I reached the train and climbed the steps into the cab, shifting her weight as I went. She let out another weak whimper, her head lolling against my arm. The moment I set her down, I turned back toward the door. The lead wolf stood at the base of the steps, staring up at me. His expression wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear either. It was something else. A warning. I had no idea what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. The train rumbled forward, cutting through the darkness. The injured wolf lay curled on the floor of the cab, her breath shallow, but still there. I kept glancing down at her between checking the tracks, my fingers drumming anxiously against the controls. I needed help. Fast. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts with one hand, my other still on the throttle. There was only one person who might be crazy enough to help me. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then a groggy voice answered. This better be good. Chris, I need a favor. A big one. There was a pause. You're hauling freight in the middle of nowhere. What kind of favor? A wolf. Pregnant one. She's hurt bad. I need you to take a look at her. Silence. Then, you're shitting me. Dead serious. She won't make it if I don't do something. Chris exhaled sharply. Jesus, man. That's a wild animal. You can't just bring her into town like a stray dog. I don't have a choice. She's dying. More silence. Then a muttered curse. Fine. Bring her to my clinic. But if she rips my face off, it's on you. I hung up and tightened my grip on the controls. The city was still miles away. Would she even last that long? Then I noticed something in the side mirror. Movement. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Shadows darted along the treeline, fast, low to the ground. The wolves. They were following me. My chest tightened. They weren't letting her go. Even now, with the train barreling ahead, they kept pace, their lean bodies weaving through the trees like ghosts. The lead wolf was there, just barely visible in the dim glow of the moon. His eyes locked onto mine through the glass. He knew where I was going, and he wasn't leaving her behind. The train screeched into the station, the brakes whining in protest. My hands were slick with sweat as I yanked the throttle back, my heart pounding against my ribs. Chris was already there, standing next to his truck with a med bag slung over his shoulder. His face was a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. I barely had the train stopped before I jumped down, landing hard on the gravel. She's bad, man, I said, breathless. She's barely holding on. Chris didn't waste time arguing. He climbed into the cab, took one look at the wolf, and cursed under his breath. Damn it, Stevens. She's critical. I know. He knelt beside her, his fingers pressing gently against her ribs. She's in labor, too weak to push. If we don't move fast, she's gone. And so are the pups. The words hit me like a punch. I already knew, but hearing him say it made it real. Can we get her to your clinic? I asked. Chris hesitated. Moving her might kill her. We need to work on her now. He snapped his fingers toward his truck. I need more supplies. Get my case, back seat. I bolted. Gravel crunched under my boots as I sprinted to the truck, yanking the door open and grabbing the heavy medical case. When I turned back, something made me stop. Just beyond the glow of the station lights, at the edge of the trees, the pack had gathered. They weren't coming closer. They weren't making a sound. Just watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and ran back to Chris, handing him the case. They followed us. He didn't look up. Figured they would. They're not leaving her. He worked quickly, pulling out supplies, checking her vitals, setting up fluids. The wolf twitched weakly, barely responding to his touch. Come on, girl, he murmured. Stay with me. Minutes stretched like hours. The air was thick with tension. I kept glancing at the pack, half expecting them to charge if something went wrong. Then Chris let out a sharp breath. I think I can get the first pup out. But if she crashes, there's nothing I can do. I nodded, throat tight. Do it. He worked with quick precision, his hands steady despite the urgency. I held my breath as he guided the first pup into the world. Tiny, slick body, motionless. My stomach dropped. Is it? Then a twitch. Tiny gasp. Chris rubbed its side roughly, clearing its airway. The pup let out the faintest, high-pitched whimper. I exhaled shakily. One was alive, but the mother still wasn't in the clear. We're not done yet, Chris muttered. Stay with me, girl. We're not losing you. Chris worked with a precision that only came from years of experience, but even he looked tense. The mother wolf was weak, too weak, but she was fighting. I held my breath as he delivered another pup. Then another. Tiny, fragile bodies, slick with fluid. Each one still, unmoving for a terrifying moment. Then movement, faint cries, life. Chris let out a sharp breath, rubbing the last pup roughly to stimulate it. "Come on, little guy." A moment later, a soft whimper filled the air. He handed the pup to me, wrapping it in a towel. "Keep it warm." I swallowed hard, cradling the trembling creature. It barely fit in my palm. I glanced at the mother. Her breathing was still labored, her body completely spent. She'd given everything. Chris checked her pulse, his jaw tight. "She's hanging on, barely, but she made it." I exhaled, tension bleeding out of me. She was alive. The pups were alive. But now what? I glanced toward the edge of the trees. The pack was still there, watching. They hadn't moved. Not an inch. They knew. Chris followed my gaze. "They're waiting for her." I nodded, heart hammering. "Yeah, but she's in no shape to walk out of here." Chris wiped his hands on his jeans. "Then we take her to them." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like we weren't about to walk a half-conscious wild animal and her newborn straight into a pack of wolves. But he was right. It was the only way. Carefully, we bundled the mother wolf in blankets, making sure she wouldn't be jostled too much. The pups were tucked against her belly, their tiny bodies seeking warmth. She didn't react much, just a faint twitch of her ears, a barely audible whine. Chris grabbed the other end of the makeshift stretcher. "Let's move before we change our minds." We stepped off the platform and started toward the trees. The wolves didn't retreat, didn't growl. They just watched. The lead wolf, the one with the piercing yellow eyes, took a step forward. We stopped. A single moment stretched between us, a silent understanding. Then, the lead wolf let out a low, quiet sound, a signal. The pack began to move, not toward us, away, deeper into the woods. They were leading us, guiding us home. The forest swallowed us whole as we followed the pack deeper into the darkness. The only sound was the crunch of our boots on damp leaves and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the mother wolf. She was barely conscious, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Chris and I carried her carefully, making sure not to jostle the tiny pups nestled against her side. The lead wolf padded ahead, guiding us without a sound. Every few steps, he glanced back, his golden eyes catching the moonlight. After what felt like an eternity, the trees opened into a clearing, a quiet, hidden place untouched by humans, a safe haven. The wolves slowed. The reddish one let out a soft whine, pacing nervously as we laid the mother down in the grass. She stirred, her ears twitching. Her body was still weak, but there was something in her breathing now, something steady. She was going to make it. Chris stepped back first, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This is as far as we go." I hesitated, then knelt beside her, brushing my hand over her fur one last time. "You're home now." The pack moved in, silent, graceful shadows reclaiming one of their own. The lead wolf stepped forward, stopping just a foot away from me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he did something I'll never forget. He dipped his head, just slightly, a gesture so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. Acknowledgement. Then, just like that, they turned and melted back into the trees. The mother wolf, the pups, gone into the night. Chris exhaled. "Think they'll remember you?" I watched the last flicker of movement disappear into the shadows. "Yeah, I think they will." We stood there a long time, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. The forest felt different now. Not empty, not silent, just watching. I turned back toward the tracks, feeling something settle deep inside me. Some things you just don't forget.